This is Chapter 1, Problem E1-5, about classifying costs. So before we start, let's just review a couple of these terms that we're going to be using. So product costs, those are the costs that are going to go into the product that you're building. And period costs are the things that are expensed during the period. So it's easiest to start with period costs. Those are any kind of selling expenses and any kind of administrative expenses that you're going to incur. Product costs are also called inventoriable costs. They're all the costs related to producing your product. So they can even be the cost of the factory that you're producing the product in. So a little bit of the heat and lights and all of that kind of stuff goes into the product, as does any kind of materials and labor. So as you're building that product, you're adding money into it. You're buying some material and putting it in. You're paying a laborer to work, and as you do that, you're increasing the value of that inventory. You own that inventory. That's still an asset. It's a product that you own as inventory, and it's not going to become an expense until you sell it and you no longer possess that value. So that's the difference between product and period costs. Then direct materials are the materials that we can track directly to the product. Things like glue or sandpaper we may not be able to trace directly to the product, and so that'll be considered overhead. But other materials that we can measure or count that go into our product, those are direct materials. Then direct labor, sometimes we call it touch labor, that's the labor directly working on building the product. A supervisor or a factory manager or somebody like that might be considered manufacturing overhead. They're not touching the product, they're overseeing many different kinds of products, and so they don't count as direct labor. Only the people that really work on the products count as direct labor. So manufacturing overhead includes what I said, supervisory labor. It includes indirect materials, those things that are hard to trace, the glue, the paint, the screws, the sandpaper, all those kinds of things that we use to make the product, but we don't really know exactly how much we use for each product. And then overhead also includes things like factory rent, lights, utilities of all sorts that are used to run the factory, that's used to make the products. If we're paying utilities on a building where our salespeople work or our administrative people work, that is a period cost, because those are costs associated with selling and administrative expenses. Okay, and then finally, prime costs. Those are simply direct materials plus direct labor. Those are the primary costs of making our product. And then conversion costs are the costs required to convert that raw material that comes into our factory into a finished product. So once we get the raw materials in, we're going to add labor and overhead to create our final product. So labor and overhead are the conversion costs. Okay, so let's look at this problem. First, let's scan the list and see if we can find any direct materials. All right, let's see. This second one, cost of fiberglass. Fiberglass is used to build the skateboards directly, so we'll call that a direct material. Let me just center these. Okay, and then let's see what else. Wages, sales commission, cost of high-grade wheels. Those wheels are probably a material. We'll put them here in direct materials. Screws are probably manufacturing overhead. Unless it's some great big screw that's an essential part of the product, it's probably not something we're necessarily counting. We've got a whole bin of screws sitting there. We're not really paying attention to how many we're using. So actually, we'll put screws over here in manufacturing overhead. Okay, let's see what else. Factory rent, wages, utilities. None of those things are direct materials, so I think we're done with that column. Now let's go to direct labor. Production supervisor. That is usually considered manufacturing overhead because they're not directly touching that product. Wages of assembly person, however, that is direct labor. Sales commission. This is money that someone's earning, but it's not somebody that's working on the product. So we're going to call that a period cost. So let's see what we've done here. There's 3 different kinds of wages that we've been talking about here. Production supervisor, they're associated with the product, just not directly touching it. Wages of assembly person, which is really involved directly in manufacturing the product. And then wages or commissions of the salesperson, which isn't really involved in making the product at all. That's a period cost. Okay. Let's see what else would be a direct labor cost. Anything else? Screws, factory rent. Wages of the skateboard painter. The skateboard painter is working directly with the product. That's direct labor. And we're talking about wages. Factory utilities, no. Utilities for corporate office. Okay. So let's go to manufacturing overhead here. Let's see. Cost of fiberglass we've got. Sales commission we've got. How about factory rent? It is part of the cost of making our products, so it goes in one of these 3 columns. And we'll stick it over here in overhead. We've already got the skateboard painter. How about factory utilities? Again, we have to have that factory in order to make the products. We've got to have utilities in order to make the products. We can't trace them directly to the product. We don't know exactly how much light or heat it took for each product. So that's manufacturing overhead. Okay, now utilities for our corporate offices. Again, our corporate offices aren't where we make the product, so it's not a product cost. We'll call that a period cost. It's a selling and administrative cost. All right. So we've got the product costs and the period costs figured out. That's a big distinction. Now let's go back to prime costs. Remember that prime costs are simply materials plus labor, the very direct cost of making a product. So we'll look at these columns. Anything that's in direct materials or direct labor is a prime cost. Okay. Then conversion cost. Expenditures that we incur in order to convert raw materials to finished goods. So again, that's labor and manufacturing overhead. So anything that has a designation as overhead or labor will go in this column. Okay, there you have it.